I'd like to discuss with you rounding today. First, I just want to focus on this number right here. Here I have the number 5,428.9142. Or, we can even lop off the 2 there just for symmetry. If we wanted to be a little bit more specific, we would call this 5,428 and, that's how we could read the decimal point as an and 914 thousandths. Notice the TH there. Since we ended at the third from the right of the decimal plate, we would call that thousandths. So just to, again, key in on this vocabulary a little bit more, we have 5 in the thousandths place, 4 in the hundreds place, 2 in the tens, and 8 in the ones. So then we get to the decimal region, and you'll notice this sort of symmetry. I kind of drew in a rainbow here. The 1 sort of stands alone, but then the tens go with the tenths. But since it's to the right of the decimal place, we have a TH in the mix. The hundreds goes with the hundredths, but there's a TH to the right of the decimal point. And the thousands, they go with the thousandths. Notice how there is a TH when we are to the right of the decimal place. So I really want to emphasize 1 to the right of the decimal place is tenths, 2 to the right of the decimal place is hundredths, 3 to the right of the decimal place is thousandths. So just getting that naming down is very, very important. A little bit more on the concept of rounding. It has to do with like closeness or nearness. So let's just say we wanted to round to the nearest whole number. That would be like rounding to the ones place, if you will. Let's say I had 4.1. Again, rounding is about closeness. Well, if I break this number line region between this interval between 4 and 5, if I broke that up into 10 parts, so this is 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, 4.5, 4.6, 4.7, 4.8, 4.9, and then let's say there is 5.0. Okay, well, what we can do is we could place an X where 4.1 is. Again, each one of these is a tenth. We divided the length of that unit into 10 equal parts, so they're each a tenth. If I put a little X here, that's where 4.1 is, because it goes 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, so on and so forth. There's 4.5, there's 4.9, yada, yada, yada. If I said 4.1, what is it closer to? Is it closer to 4 or 5? Well, it's certainly nearer to 4. So if we rounded to the nearest whole number, we would say that rounds to 4. Now 4.3, well, that's closer to 4 than 5, so 4.3. Again, that would round to 4. Even 4.4, same thing. This whole region is closer to 4. However, once we get to 4.5, once we get halfway there, the rule with rounding is that that's when you're going to round up. So 4.5, 4.7, 4.9, they are all, I mean, I think you would believe that 4.7 and 4.9, they are certainly closer to 5, but I'm doing little squiggly equals here. 4.5, we're going to round that up, okay? So here we round down. We essentially lose the decimal place. Here we round up and we bump up the portion in question, the ones place. We bump that 4 up to a 5. So when we round up, that's where we're going to bump up the portion in question. Again, they said to the nearest whole number, we bump it up to 5. With 4.1 and 4.3 and 4.0 and 4.4, we're just going to leave them as is. Just keep the 4. Okay, so you're either going to sort of keep things as is, or bump up the region in question by 1. And it really has to do with closeness on the number line. And so key idea here, though, at 4.5, that's where we started rounding up, okay? So 5 or greater is where we're going to round up, okay? So here's a couple examples. Let's say we wanted to know to the nearest whole number. 4.873, or 4 and 873 thousandths. Remember, this is tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Well, for the nearest whole number, we're going to look 1 to the right, just like we were looking at the tenths before for the nearest whole number. We're going to look 1 to the right. Is that 5 or bigger? Yes, it is. So we're going to bump the whole number in question up to 5. Let's say for 2.198, 2 and 198 tenths, hundredth, thousandths. 2 and 198 thousandths, well, to the nearest whole number. So they want us to consider the nearest whole number here. So we look 1 to the right. Is that 5 or greater? No, it's not. So that means that we're just, let's make sure I have the right color scheme here. We're just going to stay closer to 2. Okay? So 2.198 is certainly closer to 2. And we wouldn't be rounding that up to 3. Okay, but so now for these examples, let's say we went to the nearest tenth. So now they want us to consider the 10th place. So this is the place that we're looking at. So we always have to look 1 to the right. We'll say, is this 7? Is it 5 or greater? Well, yes, 7 is greater than 5. So what we're going to do is we're going to have to bump up this 8 up by 1. 8 plus 1 is 9. So we would call that 4.9. That's to the nearest tenth. Now let's do this same sort of thing for this region down here. Okay, if I wanted to go to the 10th again, what would I do? Well, I would say, okay, I'm considering to the nearest tenth, so I'm going to look 1 to the right. I'll look at the hundredths. Is that 5 or greater? Well, 9 is certainly greater than 5, so I'm going to bump this up. I'm going to call it 2.1 is going to go up by 1, up to 2. 2.2, that's 2.198 to the nearest tenth. Let's go to the nearest hundredth on each of these. So what's interesting is if we're going to the nearest hundredth, we're going to consider this. We're wondering, should we keep the 7 as is or should we bump it up by 1? Well, now we're going to look 1 to the right. We're going to look actually at the thousandths. Is that 5 or greater? Well, no, it's not. So then we'll just keep what we have, 4.87. If it was like 4.878, then we would round it up to 4.88. But since we had a 3, that was not 5 or bigger, we'll just keep it as is, 4.87. Let's check out this one here. So now to the nearest hundredth, we're going to look at the thousandths down here. We're wondering about the thousandths. Is that 5 or bigger? Yes, it is. It is 5 or bigger. So that means the portion or region in question, the hundredths, we're going to bump that up by 1. But if we add 1 to this, it would be like so. We would actually have 10 in the hundredth spot. 10 hundredths, we'd actually bump that up to another tenth. So what's interesting is to the nearest hundredth, we still have to write 2 decimal places here, but this is really 2.20. Another way you could think about that, you could just, it's probably easier if you just think of it as 2.19. We're wondering if the 19 should stay as is or should it get bumped up. The 8 was 5 or bigger, so we're going to bump the 19 up by 1, bump it up to 20. That gives us 2.20. That's to the nearest hundredth. So that's the key with rounding. Again, If it's 5 or greater, round it up. Also make sure, last thing here, if someone says, round this number to the nearest 10th, what you need to make sure you do is you have to actually put eyeballs on 1 to the right. Is that 5 or bigger? No, it's not. So to the nearest 10th, we have 1.2. Alternatively, if we had 1.2 and they asked us to round this to the nearest, let's say, 100th. Well, we're considering the hundredths. We look 1 to the right. Throw the eyeballs up there. Now I'm looking up better with my eyeballs. Ask yourself, is that 7, 5 or greater? Yes, yes it is. So what we have to do is we have to bump up our hundredth by 1, and we'll be at 1.26, or 1 and 26 hundredths. So make sure you know where to look. Look 1 to the right. Is it 5 or greater? If so, bump up the number in question at the place in the decimal that you're supposed to be looking. Otherwise, just keep it as is and move on.